Hey, what's going on everybody? Gareth here, FCP Euro. Welcome back to another buyer's guide. Today we're going to be talking about BMW's third generation X5, also known as the F15 or the F85 if it's an X5M. All right, so F15, what does that mean exactly? Well, it's just BMW's chassis development code. In this case, BMW decided to use F15, and this is the third generation of X5, but BMW's third generation of X5s ran production from model year 2014 until model year 2018. In this video, we're gonna be talking about a lot of various topics about this generation of BMW. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the drivetrain variances, so the engines, the transmissions, X-Drive or rear-wheel drive, since that is an option. We'll also be talking about other things like the equipment inside the vehicle and just the general overall ownership experience. In terms of price point on this generation of X5, brand new, these cars ranged in price from anywhere around $60,000 upwards of $90,000, even close to $100,000, depending on how they're optioned out, depending on which model you bought. Since production is in on these and the newest of those cars is now 3 years old, a lot of these have come off lease. Even 2014 is the earliest production. You're now looking at a car that's about 7 years old. So you could see your entry-level X5 models, which would be an X-Drive 35i or S-Drive 35i with high mileage, being available for under $20,000. Or you can have your high-end models such as the X5M still being upwards of $50,000 in value, depending of course on the mileage, how it's optioned, etc. So when it comes to the competitive landscape on the third generation X5 here, there is absolutely no shortage of mid-sized SUVs available in the marketplace. So at least on the German side of things, Audi has their Q5 and Q7, Mercedes has the GLE. We also have Porsche with the Cayenne, and I think you can also potentially argue the Macan might fall into there as well as a potential alternative option. Really, the pick is up to you. You know, if you have a favorite for a vehicle brand, then that's probably what you're gonna go with. If you're just simply looking for a mid-size SUV, it is very, very wide, and I would even say for BMW's case, the F25 X3 competes against the X5 in terms of general sizing and options and interior equipment. And then of course you also have the BMW X6, which is kind of a hatchback four-door thing. A lot of people like those as well, but I mean, it's generally the same size of vehicle, a lot of the same parts. So even the X6 competes against the X5. So just within the BMW family, you have two other options that, in my opinion, directly compete against, depending on what you're looking for. We're going to be only talking about the US market in terms of the options that are available in terms of models. But within the US market alone, you have your X-Drive 35i and S-Drive 35i. Basically, one's an X-Drive all-wheel drive model and one's a rear-wheel drive model. You have the X-Drive 40e, which is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So it has an internal combustion engine and a battery pack and an electric motor. The X-Drive 35d, which is the diesel variant, so BMW 6-cylinder diesel. We'll talk about that engine in a little bit. The X-Drive 50i, which is a twin-turbo V8. And then you have, of course, the F85 X5M, which, at least in terms of model designation, is kind of its own thing, but shares the same general platform, and we're going to touch base on that today as well, because that is an option that you might be looking at, particularly in terms of the performance SUV segment. The biggest differentiator I think most of you are going to notice on any F15 X5 is going to be just the outward appearance of the car. Most people who are buying cars, that's the number one thing that they're looking for, just how's the car appeal to them. And we have three really good distinct examples of kind of what you would find within this range of vehicles. So all the way to my right, we have what would kind of just be a standard F15 X5 appearance. So standard front bumper cover, standard arch extensions, standard side skirts. That is going to be probably the most common X5 that you're going to find in the market. All the way to my left, you have kind of like what would be like an M Sport package. So kind of a hybrid of what the X5M would be in terms of the front bumper cover, but it has the arch extensions, different wheels, different rear bumper, completely different trim on the car. So from an appearance, it honestly looks like an entirely different car. So again, if that's something that you're considering, you want the upgraded option on the vehicle, you're gonna have to go ahead and look for those cars. They're not as common as you might think, but obviously those little trim pieces and accents do make a completely different appearance to the car. And then you have the X5M, which by default, it comes the way that it comes, and it's gonna be the most aggressively styled car out of all of them. Some of it purposeful. For example, the oil cooler That's located in the lower right corner of the car. You can see that visibly. But a lot of the other things like the arch extensions, those are gonna be pretty standard. Quad tip exhaust in the rear, that's kind of bespoke to the X5M. But I am happy to say that hypothetically, if you got a really good deal on a basic appearance package car, you could technically exchange all these parts out down the road to upgrade to like an M appearance package car. So that is an option. Another thing that's worth mentioning is you have factory grills, which are gonna be like kind of like your gray center section with the chrome outside. BMW has some optional grills that they also install, which would be like the black chrome, all blacked out. The X5M grills also differ in the way that the center slats are kind of doubled up, but technically all those are interchangeable, assuming that you have the correct front bumper cover. Like an X5M grill is not going to fit your standard bumper cover just because of the shape, but if you did put on like the M Performance or M Sport front bumper cover, you could technically install the double sided grill if you really wanted to. Even something as simple as the colors of the grill also do change the way that the vehicle looks from the front. When it comes to the inside of the car, this is also another deciding factor as well. Realistically speaking, these cars pretty much come fully loaded from the factory. So leather seats, panoramic sunroof, you're not gonna find a huge variation of the interior equipment. I will say that there is an optional audio system for these cars. So for example, a Bang & Olufsen system, that would be the like high-end audio system is available. But even the factory audio system is really good. They all come with a 10.2-inch iDrive screen, which is also a touchscreen, which is pretty cool. That's gonna also be like where a lot of the information in the vehicle is displayed. I will say though, on the X5M, that's gonna have kind of its own bespoke seats, a little bit more side bolstering. Also, like if you look at the instrument cluster and the iDrive, those displays are also a little bit different from an F15 to an F85. Obviously, it's gonna have more of the M badging on the X5M, as you would typically expect on any M vehicle. So generally speaking, if you look at any of these cars, they're all equipped relatively the same. Only the X5M is gonna have a drastic difference in terms of the interior appointment. The way that BMW does their model designation, the X5 or actually any of the SUVs, along with a couple other cars, the meaning of basically what that car has and the equipment in it is basically in the second part of the badge. So it's just an X5 generically, and then you have something like xDrive 35i, and that'll tell you, okay, it has xDrive, and if it's a 35i, at least in this generation's case, you know that it has the N55 6-cylinder engine. Just like if it was an xDrive 50i, that's gonna have the N63 twin-turbo V8. If it's an SDrive 35i, that means it's an N55 rear-wheel drive. But now that we're talking about some of the engines, let's go ahead and talk about the powertrain on these cars. So we're gonna start off all of the engines here with our xDrive 35i and SDrive 35i model. Aside from one being rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, they both share the same N55 engine. We've talked about the N55 engine a lot. It is the successor to the N54 engine, which if you've been researching BMWs, you might know that the N54 is, it's not unreliable, but it could be expensive to maintain. We're happy to say that the N55 engine was a huge step up in terms of reliability. It has a twin scroll turbo, so basically two separate ports on the hot side, which is a much more efficient setup. So instead of two turbos, it only has one. So in terms of the power output of this engine, it makes 302 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque, and BMW claims a 24 mile per gallon average, although realistically, in day-to-day life, you're probably gonna see somewhere between high 19 and low 21-ish miles per gallon. So next up, we're gonna talk about the xDrive 40e. This is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. That means it has an internal combustion engine, battery pack, and electric motor. The electric motor obviously boosts the output of the engine that's in it. But in this case, let's talk about the engine specifically. This engine is the N20 4-cylinder engine. It could potentially be a liability long-term. There's no nice way to say that. It really hasn't deemed to be the most reliable engine that BMW's ever built. Predominantly, you have a lot of timing component issues, oil pump drive module problems, oil pump issues, a whole slew of problems that are ultimately very expensive to fix. And it's enough of a common problem that BMW, at least the US market, has had a class action settlement in regards to replacing these components past the warranty or paying for repairs that were done past the warranty period retroactively. The plug-in hybrid electric vehicle drivetrain on here with the N20 and the electric motor, you're looking at 308 horsepower and 332 pound-feet of torque. The engine itself doesn't produce that. That's also including the power from the electric motor and the battery pack. This hybrid only gets around 27 miles per gallon, which is not really that great considering, let's say the xDrive 35i averages around 21 miles per gallon. To get 6 more miles per gallon with all of that additional stuff, I don't know. We have a really in-depth diagnostic guide on the N20 engine, so we're gonna go ahead and drop a card up here. You can go ahead and click on that. That talks about the engine specifically, things to look out for, things to be aware of. I don't want to get into a huge tangent on that, but it talks about everything that you need to know. So next up, we're gonna move to the xDrive 35D. This is the only diesel variant of the F15 X5 sold in the US market. It has the N57 6-cylinder single turbo diesel engine. The N57 diesel makes 255 horsepower and 413 pound-feet of torque. Estimates suggest that the xDrive 35D averages 37 miles per gallon. That, of course, is going to vary drastically depending on how you use it, but we can say one thing about all the modern diesels, actually just diesels in general, huge amount of torque down low, which really, that's where you're gonna be primarily using for towing, driving around the town. So really, in our opinion, the xDrive 35D, if fuel economy is something you're considering about, that might be an option for you. Now we're moving from the diesel variant to our xDrive 50i. This is going to be the N63 TU engine, which is the technical update. In the case of the N63 TU, which is in the F15 X5, it's been updated in almost every way that's measurable. Basically, on the N63 TU, direct injection, hot V twin turbo V8. Hot V basically means the turbos sit in the valley of the engine up on top as opposed to being on the outside. So your exhaust and intake flow are completely reversed from any other V8 engine you would have seen. This engine makes 444 horsepower and 479 pound-feet of torque. So a lot of power, a lot of torque. So again, if you're looking for a vehicle that can tow or you're simply looking for power, obviously this engine is going to be an option. So now we're going to be moving up to the F85 X5M. The BMW internally designates this engine as the S63R, but it's the S63 TU2 basically. In terms of power, it makes 567 horsepower and 553 pound-feet of torque, which is a ton. It's a lot of power. And the way that BMW achieved this is, and I think it's worth noting here, is that there really isn't a huge difference between an N63 or the S63. It's still basically the same engine. So hot V, direct injection, a lot of the parts are interchangeable. The only things that BMW really changed on this engine is on the S63 TU, they use cross-flow exhaust manifolds for the turbos. So basically when you look at these, you have 2 ports that pull from one cylinder bank, 2 that pull from another cylinder bank, and they cross over. And the point of this is so that every 180 degrees of rotation, a pulse is sent to the turbo, each turbo. And so it constantly keeps the turbos moving. There's no interruption in the exhaust flow. So that's a very unique design feature specifically on the S63 engine. So that said, we've talked about the engines. Let's talk about the transmission options, or really lack thereof. Every single one of these cars uses a variant of ZF's 8 HP automatic transmission. We have a diagnostic guide specifically about the 8 HP transmission, and honestly, I can't really say enough positive things about it. Really, the only difference you're going to see between the different variants of these cars is the torque rating of the transmission. So for example, on your xDrive 35i, it's going to have the 8 HP 45, which is the lower torque capable transmission, and then on something like your X5M, it's going to have the 8 HP 70, which is the higher torque handling transmission. But generally, internally, it's the same transmission, just its ability to handle torque. There's obviously some internal differences there, but it's the same transmission at its core. All the cars actually use the same front diff, with of course the exception being the xDrive 35i being rear-wheel drive, so it doesn't have a front differential, but they all use the same front diffs. The only variance that you start to see is when you look at the rear differential. Most of your F15 X5s are going to have your pretty typical standard rear differential. So the oddball differential in the F15 X5 would be if you have the adaptive dynamic suspension or option S2 VPA, you would have a torque vectoring rear differential, which is a very looking different animal than your traditional open rear differential that would typically be on an F15 X5. But the torque vectoring differential is standard on the F85 X5M, and I think what's really worth noting about that is the QMV differential, which is the torque vectoring differential, actually uses 2 different types of fluid. Now we have a specific service kit on our website to deal with these specific differentials, but basically there's 3 different chambers. You have your left chamber, your center chamber, and your right chamber. The outer chambers use a very specific type of gear oil. You cannot use anything else in it except for what BMW recommends, because there is a friction modifier in that fluid that is required for the torque vectoring to work properly. And then you have your center chamber, which is where your ring and pinion are. That uses a traditional 75-90 gear oil. So very important to know that if you're servicing that specific differential, you need to be aware of the fluids and the products that you're buying to service it, because it is not traditional product, with the exception of just that center chamber. But it's the outer differentials that you really want to make sure you're putting the correct fluid in. So now we talked about the mechanics of the F15 X5 and the F85 X5M. Let's talk about basically the chassis. And so I think one thing that's worth noting is the F15 X5, or this generation of X5 in general, is almost like a facelift model for the previous generation E70 X5. Basically what BMW did is the rear design of the car. If you compared an E70 to an F15, they almost look identical from the rear. The biggest change is going to be to the front, which basically they carried over the F30 design architecture. So like, for example, how the headlights meet up with the grills. But from a chassis standpoint, I mean, there's really not much that they changed from the second generation X5. It's a double wishbone front suspension. So you have an upper control arm, two lower, and a huge aluminum knuckle that comes all the way down the front. That particular suspension, we do have a diagnostic video that talks about that, along with DIY videos that show you how to replace those components. But the one major problem with that style front suspension, at least how BMW uses it, there is no camber adjustment unless you buy the camber correction control arms, which are very expensive. However, I'm glad to say that we do offer an alternative option from Miley HD, which does have a slotted ball joint that you can move in and out and correct the camber that way. That is the one limitation that is on the front suspension of these cars. Rear suspension is an integral link rear suspension. It's been around since '95 with the E38-7 series. Every single BMW that's used an integral link rear suspension, they all look basically the same. It's been very effective, really good at maintaining suspension geometry through suspension travel, which is why BMW uses it. BMW did enlarge in the F15 over the E70, so the third row option is a little bit more of a common option. All the third row cars use a self-leveling rear suspension, so AKA air suspension. In terms of a long-term maintenance thing, that might be something you want to avoid. If the vehicle doesn't have third row seating, it's most likely going to have coil springs in the rear. And so I think the last thing we really got to talk about here is brakes, and also the tire situation. We'll talk about brakes first. Brakes on these cars, honestly, not a huge difference, at least with the standard brakes, between any other BMW you'd ever seen. But yeah, I mean, whether it's an xDrive 50i or whether it is a xDrive 35i or sDrive 35i, your standard brakes are going to be pretty much run-of-the-mill BMW stuff that you've kind of come to see if you've ever owned one before. With that said, if you buy an X5M, for example, that's going to be a little bit of a different setup. That's going to be a multi-piston front caliper or radial mounted caliper, big semi-floating rotors. So that's a little bit of a different situation. And I think one thing that's interesting to note on the F15 X5, BMW carried over the parts bin from the E70 X5M, and you can retrofit the E70 X5M brakes onto any F15 X5 if you want to do it. And I think it's worth noting too, at least on the F15 X5, mentioned tires. Tires pretty much going to be run flats from the factory. You could definitely say run flat tires definitely degrade the ride quality of the car. That's just by the very nature. Run flats are extremely expensive. So when it kind of comes to servicing these vehicles long term, you may choose not to use a run flat tire. It's not a requirement from BMW that you use a run flat tire. Transitioning from run flats to non-run flats, the ride quality of the car increases dramatically. So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Outside of them being extremely expensive, they also degrade the ride quality of the car significantly. But anyway, we hope that you learned a lot in this video, and we certainly hope that we answered any questions that you might have had about BMW's third generation X5. If you have any personal experience with this car yourself, go ahead and leave in the comment box below, or if you have any questions, also leave in the comment box below. We'll be happy to get you back and answer those questions. Hit that like button if you like this video, and hit subscribe. Like we said, we have a lot more videos coming out on the F15 X5. And as always, we'll see you for the next one. Thanks for watching.